Welcome to Twitter Travels for Pete, Next Steps Edition, where I interview former Pete for America staffers about what's next for them and what's next for us as supporters of Democrats. Welcome back, everyone. Today, I'm excited to have Lis Smith as my guest. Many of us know and loved her as the Senior Communications Advisor for the Pete Buttigieg 2020 primary campaign. But now, Lis has written a book, a New York Times best-selling book about her career in politics entitled Any Given Tuesday, A Political Love Story. Hello, Lis.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for joining me here today. Congrats on your New York Times bestseller.
Thank you. I was so excited. I worked really, really hard on this book. It took a long time to write. I never thought I'd do it, but I was so excited when I got the news.
Well, a lot of us saw that little clip on Twitter and on Facebook, and you probably loved seeing it too over again. How excited you were. You got to experience it twice that way.
Well, like a million times. Yeah, no, it was funny. I was in the middle of taping a podcast and we were taping it over Zoom, and they always say we're not going to use the video, but they did. They did use the video from that moment because it was, it was so momentous, and my joy was so pure in that moment.
Yes, and you worked hard for it. And I just finished reading it, and I wanted to thank you for writing it. I think a lot of people feel this way because, I'm a political neophyte, so I had no idea what goes on in a campaign. So that was very interesting, but I really had no idea how many sacrifices you political professionals make just to do your job and to get all that experience. You basically forego normal lifestyle, like what we think of as a normal lifestyle. And it really takes a special kind of person. And I really admire and thank you for, doing that. The reason you've got this expertise is because you've put in that work, and you have to live on the road, you have to move around. And
that's exactly why I wanted to write this book. When I was first thinking about the type of book I wanted to write, I wanted to write a book that was not, super dry or inaccessible to people who, like you, maybe political neophytes, where I'm just using very insidery language or very technical language. I wanted to make it a book that really anyone, whether you're a campaign junkie like I am, or someone who is newer to the process or unfamiliar with the process, that it's a book that you could enjoy. But I want to be honest, about what it's like to work on campaigns and how you succeed. And it is not a lifestyle that is for people who want a particularly balanced life. It's not a 9-to-5 job. You don't have the typical benefits. You don't have the 2 weeks of vacation time, but it's all worth it because, as I say, politics is one of the most important things I can imagine doing. And it's something that impacts every part of our lives. So I did want to paint people a realistic picture of what politics is actually like, because it is a real commitment.
And then the fact that you were so honest, and it's quite raw about your personal life and how everything affected you personally. That's so important for us to know. I mean, that's the real life of working on the campaign, and you can't sugarcoat that at all. And you didn't. That must have been difficult for you.
Maybe some of it was difficult. I mean, like writing about breakups is not the funnest thing in the world, right?
No.
And writing about my father passing away, certainly not fun at all. But I didn't want to sugarcoat anything because, again, I think back to when I was an 18-year-old girl looking to get into politics. There was no sort of guidebook or handbook for someone like me. There were political movies like The War Room, but you didn't really see female protagonists in there. So I wanted to provide a book that maybe an 18-year-old girl or 35-year-old woman or 50-year-old woman or 70-year-old woman, whatever it is, could pick up, but to understand the sacrifices that we have to make sometimes in this business and the harsh realities that we women sometimes have to face in this business, which is still very much a male-dominated industry.
Yeah, and it's important for us to see the low-level campaigns, like the War Room is a presidential campaign, so we don't know what it's like to work on gubernatorial campaign or Senate or any kind of local race. So, and what was interesting in the book is to see how you just went with your gut. And, you didn't, like you said, nothing had been written yet, telling a new person, like, what's it going to be like for you? And so you figured that out for yourself, and you knew it was the right place for you. And you just went for it because you thrive on that excitement.
Right. Yeah, no, I just, how I got involved was I was in college. I went to Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, and I got involved with Young Democrats. And then one day just sort of walked into the New Hampshire Democratic Party's local office and started knocking on doors, writing letters to the editor. And then it was just sort of off to the races from there. And that's sort of before my book starts. But then I got involved with John Edwards' presidential campaign in New Hampshire and traveled the country on that campaign. And then, South Dakota, Missouri, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
So is the fact that Dartmouth is in New Hampshire, does that make the student organization more a bigger deal for presidential politics anyway?
Yeah, for sure. Because if you are doing Young Democrats or College Democrats at like Columbia or something in New York, I don't know, I'm just thinking about something that's near to me, you're not going to get the same amount of attention from national politicians, and you're certainly not going to get the same amount of attention from presidential candidates. Mm-hmm. So when I was in college, I was in college from 2001 to 2005. We had the 2004 presidential primary, and every single presidential candidate came through Dartmouth multiple times, reached out to the Young Democrats multiple times. I got to see them multiple times. And so it's incredible. And that's why it made it even sweeter, what was it? I guess 15 years later when Pete won the Dartmouth area in the New Hampshire primary. Although he came up a close second against Sanders, it was still sweet to see that. But certainly at Dartmouth, you got a much, much, much more up close and personal view of the presidential process than you would at almost any other college in the country, short of outside of Iowa.
Right. So have you ever thought if you had gone to a different college, how you would be in a different career right now?
Oh, absolutely. Like at the last minute, I decided to go to Dartmouth over at Princeton. And if I'd gone to Princeton, there's no question I wouldn't be in politics today. So, but one of the reasons why I chose Dartmouth, frankly, was because I knew I was really interested in politics, and I knew that this would expose me to it. But I thought it would be more of a hobby, frankly, something I would do in my free time. And here I am 20 years later, talking on a podcast with you about it. So I guess not.
Right. Well, people should just go with their gut, right? Just go with what feels right. Well, of course, I love the Pete chapters the most. And since this is the Twitter Travels for Pete podcast, we're going to focus on conversation on the Pete campaign. And, you and I met during the campaign. So in case our listeners don't know this, you did a fundraiser in D.C. in September of 2019. And in fact, you are my chapter. You're in chapter 7 of my book, which Traveling the Trail for Pete, my memoir. And
yes, I read it. Yeah,
the chapter's entitled "Lis Smith in D.C." Isn't that clever?
Yeah. Although I got to say, the least favorite part of my book was coming up with the chapter titles, because I don't know. I found the chapter title process very extraneous after I'd written everything, but. Go on. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that was like, sometimes you just have to say what it is. And, Pete's chapter, the one, you did a couple chapters, but the one that is the perfect title for that. So,
that one was easy. Yeah.
That one was easy. Oh my gosh. But I just don't want to forget to thank you for writing the blurb for my book. Which is on the back cover. And then I realized, okay, everybody's buying online, so they're not seeing the back cover. So it's to put it in a very place of importance on the website, travelingthetrailforpete.com. But thank you very much for writing that blurb. That was very kind. So anyway, you're in my chapter 7, but I'm in your book indirectly. In the chapter 11, The Long Shot, on page 230, excuse me, where you say, one good sign. So this was after the shooting, the officer-involved shooting in South Bend, and Pete really took, as far as the campaign, politically, we can talk separately, which we won't today, about how it affected him as mayor and how it affected him personally, but it really it affected the campaign quite negatively. So then you say, but one good sign was that Pete's true believer supporters never got discouraged. They were hardcore, among the most devoted of any candidates. And you go on to say more, and I'm not going to read it. I'll give examples of that. But yeah, hardcore supporters. So I was one of them, traveling around to events and meeting lots of other supporters. And then it was later on that I started the podcast, but I was meeting a lot of other grassroots supporters on Twitter. And I thought, well, I'm going to travel to where they are and interview them about what they're doing. So I started that in late October, but in September then I had already made friends with people from the Maryland and the Virginia groups, Pete 2020 grassroots supporter groups. And so I wanted to see you. I wanted to go to see you at the fundraiser, but I also wanted to meet them. So that's what the fun of it all was. But so at your event, I ended up meeting your mom because she was off, it's towards the end. And of course I was like staying till the end of the event, if I traveled all the way from Minneapolis, and your mom was having a burger on her own over in the bar.
Right. Yeah. I remember.
And I just thought, I'm going to chat with her. But so it was funny in your book how you described her as being, liking to make friends with strangers. So I thought, okay, it's all good. But what was it like for you at that event? Was that your only fundraiser that you headlined?
No, so that was the first time I'd really done it. I did a slightly smaller one that day, but then I did after that I did one in Boston. I did one in Lexington, Kentucky, and I did one in Key West, Florida, which I would do a million times again because it was my first time ever in Key West, and it was such a beautiful community. And on the campaign trail, it's the middle of the winter, and you're in Iowa and New Hampshire. So when you get to go to Key West, it almost, even if it's just for a night, it almost feels like a vacation. But it was, so that was my first fundraiser, and I was completely blown away because the night before I went to DC, I called Andrew Mamo, who was the communications department's chief of staff, and I called him in a panic, like, oh my God, is anyone going to show up? Because I was convinced that no one would show up to see a campaign advisor like me do a fundraiser, and that they would only show up just to see, Pete. So I was shocked when I walked into the bar and there were like 120 people there or something like that. And it showed me a couple things. One, how hardcore our supporters were, but two, how we'd done a really good job of, fostering this community between our supporters and not just a candidate, Pete, and his husband, Chasten, but also our staff. And I think you may have talked about this a little bit did you ever talk to Stefan on your podcast or no?
No.
No.
Just like through DMs, and I met him. I met him in person, but it was so quick.
Yes, but this was a big thing that Stefan worked on, was sort of building the relationship between not just Pete, but also the staff and our supporters. And so it was incredible. On most of the other campaigns, I don't think you could ever imagine the staff and the supporters having that close a relationship. And I remember at the time seeing reporters and sort of people on the other campaigns snorking, really, who's going to buy a ticket to see Lis Smith speak or whatever? And then, of course, they don't know how hardcore Team Pete is. And so it was really heartening to see. And it's such an amazing community that we built. And it was a testament to not just Pete as a candidate, but to the type of campaign that we built, that even between supporters and staff, it felt like a family dynamic.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And how much was the rules of the road to be credited to that?
Yeah, sure. The rules of the road, I think, helped build the community. Those came directly from Pete. Pete wrote them. It was really important. And the rules of the road were, I think, sometimes a struggle for all of us.
Yeah,
to
some
follow.
of them, yes.
I mean, especially and I write about in the book some of those days in, October, November, December, when it felt like the online attacks were never ending, when Pete was the target of every single other campaign, and frankly, the target of very, very nasty negative attacks. I know it was hard for staff, and I know it was hard for supporters
Oh, yeah.
to sometimes hold back. But yes, the rules of the road were really important, and proud that we were the only campaign to sort of have a document like that. And we've seen since then other campaigns sort of adopt similar guidance for staff and supporters. And it's really important, especially in a time of social media, where it's so easy for people to be cruel to one another, where it's so easy for people just to take shots at one another. It reflected, I think, the good nature of it reflected what a good person, I would say, Pete is, because the nature of a campaign and the nature of its supporters is really shaped from the top. And so if you have a candidate at the top who is not a good, fundamentally good and decent person, you can sometimes see the supporters get a little bit out of control. And
yes,
I'm not going to name any.
Right, I know.
I'm not going to name any names.
Yes.
I'm not going to name any names, but we do know that there were other campaigns that really could have benefited from, and supporters that could have benefited from that sort of guidance. And I don't think that it did their candidates any good to have supporters who are out, going wild and being so mean-spirited and so, out of control on the internet. So it was really important for us.
Yeah, it's the belonging, especially in the rules of the road, that I think made us all feel like one team. And
Yeah.
I felt like, because I hadn't worked on many campaigns, but I'd heard that it wasn't the usual thing to feel like you were respected as a lowly volunteer. Like I would consider myself a lowly volunteer, but I'm sure the campaign didn't think that we were all working for the same cause. And every person that I met on the trail, Mike Schmuel, Nina Smith, Pete and Chaston, of course. It was just everybody was so kind and considerate and respectful of everything that we were doing, and I think that's really what made the difference.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I would dispute your characterization of yourself as a lowly volunteer. It felt like everywhere we went, we saw you, and I know that you did a lot for that campaign in terms of volunteering, fundraising, all of that. But we did hear from a lot of supporters that this is the first time that they were involved in a campaign. And one of the reasons why they got involved was because of the sort of sense of belonging that the campaign fostered. And people from all sorts of different backgrounds. And that was, that sometimes it was very emotional sometimes to hear some of the stories of people and how they got involved and how they'd always sort of felt like sometimes that even in their own lives, like they were always on the outside, but the campaign made them feel loved, made them feel like they belonged, made them feel like they were respected. And that was one of the most rewarding parts of that 14-month adventure of ours.
Oh, definitely. So, but was it surprising at first when you, the first sort of evidence of overwhelming support by volunteers? Or was it sort of like, oh, yeah, this makes sense? Or like, we better adjust?
As I talk about in the book, we did not expect the campaign to take off as quickly and as soon as it did. Now, remind me, when did you get involved?
Well, the first I saw him at May 2nd, 2019, when he came to Minneapolis.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't. It was, it was that famous March CNN town hall. That's the first time I saw him. So
okay, yes,
yeah.
Okay, got it. So, that's what I talk about in the book is when Pete announced his exploratory committee. It was a very, we did on a shoestring budget. It was 3 staffers. We got a conference room in Washington, D.C., near the White House, invited reporters, and it was very, very different from, the highly produced announcements that we'd seen from other candidates up to that point. And it spoke to, one, I mean, at that point we had no money, but it just spoke to how much of a long shot Pete was. And our goal for the first quarter, the first 3 months was to raise $1 million. But after the CNN town hall, which was a month and a half after Pete announced, he just took off like a rocket ship.
Mm-hmm.
Within I think 2 days, we'd raised $1 million. And then by the end of the quarter, we'd raised $7 million. So no, we were not prepared. Well, in a good way. We were very surprised by the response that he elicited from people just due to the CNN town hall and how much support he was able to attract. And along the way, from there, through the official announcement in South Bend on April 15th, to his travels across Iowa. And then, of course, I think when we really, really, really got to see it was at the steak fry in Iowa in September. You were there, right? Were you there?
Yes, we took a busload of people from our Minnesota for Pete group. It was so fun.
Right. And that was the first time, I think, as a campaign, we really saw the intensity of it, because that was after Pete's poll numbers had sort of, I would say, been stagnant or flatlined, and he'd sort of had this charmed rise where he'd gone up and up, but then over the summer, it sort of seemed like his moment had come and gone. Yeah. Then there's the steak fry, and he has more supporters there than any other candidate.
Yeah, that was obvious.
The loudest contingent, and it surprised us a little bit. Our Iowa team knew that we were going to have a really good turnout, but I was still skeptical. I try not to get my hopes up too high. Mm-hmm. But then it really surprised reporters, because reporters and national reporters in particular were already sort of writing Pete's obituary. Mm-hmm. And then they go and they see how we have the biggest turnout there. And not only that, the enthusiasm of our supporters, and it really changed how they thought about Pete, the campaign, mm-hmm. And how they were covering him. So it was really, really important.
Yeah, so that was in September, and before that was the Iowa State Fair, which was so much fun. Yes. I mean, he must have gotten a little bump from that. And because there were no other candidates scheduled that day, so then the media could just walk around with him, walk around the whole fair. And I saw you there, and I couldn't handle, I think he was walking around for like 3 hours. I could only handle walking around for 2 with following the entourage. But I always told people after that, oh my God, he's so fit. He's so in great physical condition if he can walk around and talk that whole time. It's like amazing.
Yes. I remember seeing you when he we paused somewhere for a second. It was and it was so hot, and he was going around eating all
everything,
the fair food, which is like, I honestly, I don't even understand how he could eat all that stuff and still go around. But yeah, no, that was great. And I mean, there's a huge physical element to a presidential campaign, because it's not like he was just walking around the fair. And however, it was so
it's
hot,
fast
and
too. He was walking fast.
yeah, and eating all this disgusting food. And by disgusting, I just mean very caloric and probably things you shouldn't be mixing. All the fried Oreos and slushies and pork chops and whatever. It's delicious, but it's just maybe the human body, I don't think, is meant to combine all those things at one time. But on top of that, you have a scrum of 30 reporters who are basically jostling you. And then you have people who are coming up to shake your hand, to get your autograph, to say hello, to get a selfie. And so it takes a lot out of you. And luckily, not every day on the campaign trail is quite that physical, but that day definitely was.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So he started to get, I think, a bump there, but for sure the steak fry. And then the Liberty and Justice dinner. And in my mind, that was like, okay, rock star.
I know when he entered to the smoke and everything, that was definitely, I think that was definitely one of my highlights, And
I did have a podcast episode on that. So I had my recorder in the room. So I've got sound from what it was like in the audience, which is different than the sound that you have from so that was exciting. And then the next day, I went to a very small event. I saw you that St. Charles, Iowa, Charles City, sorry. And so it was like the opposite sort of thing. Here at the Liberty and Justice, he was in the arena, thousands and thousands of people, a big deal. And then it's just this totally opposite, very small setting at the Elks Club. So, and he can do both. He can do anything. He can talk to anybody. He can.
Right. And that was critical to how he won Iowa, which is that he did events both big and small. And it's why I think those early primary states are important in the way that they're set up. And I know that they're going to, Iowa's probably a thing of the past now, but one thing that you do benefit from when it is a smaller state like Iowa or New Hampshire is that, yes, you can do those big rallies, but a lot of the time it is more intimate. It is, sometimes it is just 20 people or 50 people, and you have to do those small events to win. You have to go to the smaller counties to win, especially in a caucus state. And that's part of how Pete won, is that he didn't just go to the metro areas. He didn't just go to the bigger cities in Iowa. He went everywhere. And he spent a lot of time in the ruby red rural communities that a lot of the other candidates didn't. And that was what allowed him to prevail in terms of the caucuses.
Oh yeah, and then but going back to the LJ, the Barnstormers. Yeah. Oh my gosh, they were really instrumental in helping to get such a huge crowd of us there and to keep us involved. So I want to shout out to them. It was so exciting.
Love the Barnstormers.
So exciting. Yes. Oh my gosh. So why do you think so many people got involved in the campaign? Well, we talked about how belonging was part of it, but what about Pete? This it's like the no-brainer kind of question because we're talking to the choir here mostly with the listeners. But often in our campaigning we'd say the why Pete or hashtag why Pete, right? And he just made everybody feel hope, feel good. And I know you write several times about how he made you feel, as a professional. But was that obvious to you that obviously, that's why we, the hardcore, that's why we felt the same way about him, how we thought he was the one? That's sort of awkwardly worded question, but now's our chance to talk to him as the one.
No, I totally understand. And as I read in the book, I I didn't know if people would take to it. I suspected they would because he was so different. And he had that line in the campaign about, it's time to change the channel. And I had faith that people were ready to sort of change the channel on all the endless partisanship, the endless warfare, the yelling, the screaming, the demonization that goes on in politics. And he offered just a really calm, kind, decent voice that people gravitated toward because, Trump had turned up the volume so much in politics, turned up the hate so much in politics. And there were so many Democrats who thought that to respond to Trump, you had to sort of be him. And Pete understood, no, actually, you have to be the opposite of him. And that's what people respond to. And that's why I do think that, sure, there were some long time hardcore Democratic partisans who've been involved in multiple presidential campaigns or who volunteered and donated to multiple presidential campaigns who gravitated toward Pete, but also why there are people who got involved in politics for the first time because of him. Because for the first time, they heard someone who, one, who treated them like adults, and who, two, wasn't trying to engage in this sort of race to the bottom that can happen in politics, wasn't trying to appeal to the worst of human beings, wasn't trying to appeal to the lowest common denominator, and was speaking to people in a highly intelligent way, but also with kindness, respect. And those are a lot of things that we sometimes forget are important in politics. So that's why I do think he was able to attract all of this support, and he just tapped into the goodness of people. And we don't do that enough in politics, and hopefully he provides an example for more politicians going forward that you don't just have to engage in this race to the bottom, that you can appeal to the goodness of other people, and that's enough.
Oh, well said. Well said. It's so important, and he continues in all, as Secretary of Transportation in all of his media appearances. He remains kind and logical, and I'm sure he's very well liked. I mean, really,
Yeah.
that's the thing. Like, once you get to know, or you don't even have to spend very much time with him to like him. So that's what always bugged me during the campaign when, anyone would say anything. Well, have you actually met him? Because I don't think you would say that if you met him,
Right.
if you talk to him.
Yeah, no, I know. And it's just one of the things about politics is, people take their support for their candidates very personally.
Mm-hmm.
And when they see another candidate sort of rising and doing well, and especially an unconventional candidate like Pete,
Mm-hmm.
He was 37 years old, openly gay, mayor of a city of 100,000 people, not exactly a traditional resume for a presidential candidate.
Mm-hmm.
It did drive other candidates nuts, and it drove their supporters nuts because they wondered, well, why him and why not us?
Yeah, it's not fair. And it's not his turn. He's not staying in his lane. Exactly. Or something like that.
And maybe I think I wrote something like this in the book, but maybe instead of complaining about him, they should have tried to learn from him, because clearly he was tapping into something that they weren't. And, the meaner they got toward him, the more negative they got toward him, it's not like it helped them. So, again, as I said before, I hope people can learn from the example of Pete and why he was so successful, because our politics would be a lot better if we had a lot more Pete's in it.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm going to have to get to the questions that are from the audience. I asked on Twitter and Facebook if anybody had questions for you. Many, many people wanted to thank you for everything that you did on the campaign and how much you helped Pete. So I just wanted to make sure that I told you that. And we could really see how, everything that you were doing to advance his name and campaign was working. So thank you for that.
Yes, no, thank you. It was, as I say in the book, honor of a lifetime, but thank you. More importantly, it's not what I did, it's what the thousands of supporters across the
Well, we
country
worked as
did.
a
So
team. We couldn't have done it, without you, and you couldn't have. The campaign couldn't have done it without us. So, we were part of the gift that Biden got. He got us when Pete endorsed Biden, and we came with him. That was a pretty nice deal, at least from my perspective. So now I do have a question for the campaign. This is I don't know, you've probably thought of this, but what change would you have made in the campaign if you could turn back time? Yeah, have you thought about like, oh, well, we should have done such and such differently, or maybe something else, or maybe you don't want to tell us that, but that was a question.
I know I saw that, and my thought on that is this: I'd rather focus more on the positive, frankly, than any changes we could have made. But look, any campaign, there's no campaign like ours that could have been prepared for how quickly we took off. And Mike talked about it in terms of like we warped political time. It's like we skipped 8 of the traditional steps that you go through in a presidential campaign, and that help you frankly prepare for everything that's coming ahead in a presidential campaign. So it's clear there were some growing pains in the campaign, but it's hard to say how we could have remedied it, because if we had, let's say we had spent money on getting more staff before the CNN town hall and he hadn't taken off, then we would have had to fold the campaign. But I think a key lesson is that to invest early in having good staff and good infrastructure, because it will stop you from making mistakes, sort of amateur rookie mistakes that any campaign can make. But it's hard to say that we could have planned ahead for that, because no one expected for us to take off that quickly. But when you take off that quickly, it does mean that you are then scrutinized the way that other candidates are. When you go from last in the pack to, I talk about how a couple of weeks after the CNN town hall, he was third in Iowa, then you start to get the same scrutiny as other candidates. But we didn't have the infrastructure really to handle it.
That's a double whammy.
I mean, I didn't even Exactly. So it's, sort of champagne problems. But I would say that we did lag behind a little bit in being able in hiring staff, and that probably hurt us a little bit in terms of being able to first see problems that were arising, or being able to harness the power of all of our volunteers for the maximum gain. So I guess I would probably say that.
Yeah, well, that's really important to point out. And I know our regional director Kirsten was saying, well, we're building the rocket ship as it's taking off. So that was her analogy, because we are always asking, well, when do we get a campaign? When do we get staff? Blah blah blah. So
exactly, yeah,
yeah. So all these volunteers and supporters who wanted to do something, and but then we just did our own deal. Whatever, like if we saw something that needed to be done, we did it, and that was welcomed. Our contributions were welcomed. Like Minnesota, we had our state fair booth, and that was a huge success. So across the country, that's what I was finding, that these grassroots group were just doing whatever they thought would work. And I think just knowing that their contributions were welcome, and that's part of the whole teamwork and the rules of the road thing. So we felt like we're working together for the same goal. Okay, so I have a question about how Pete the go everywhere on media. So one person asked, why didn't Pete go even more due to more leftist media outlets like the Young Turks? And then so the extremes on both ends, I guess, because he was going on Fox, and I'm just asking the question.
Oh, totally. Well, what I would say is this is on a presidential campaign, your time is very, very valuable. And Pete did more media, not even close, than any other candidate. So you really, and even with our go everywhere strategy, you have to factor in sort of the opportunity cost, right? So going to the very far right, we're really not going to. There are not a lot of Democrats that are reading the Daily Wire.
Right.
There are not a lot of Democrats who are listening to Ben Shapiro.
Right.
And going to the very far left, there are not a lot of Pete Buttigieg voters who are going to be watching the Young Turks.
Right. So you were strategic about it.
Yes. So we had to be strategic about it. And we sometimes the media makes it sound like we just said yes to everything. And that, in the early days, that when I was the only communications staffer there for, a month or month and a half, whatever it was, that my strategy was saying yes to everything. And no, it wasn't quite that simple. We said yes.
Right.
We said yes to everything that made sense. We said yes to everything that I thought would be of strategic importance to Pete. Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. Most of the time, I think it was. But yeah, if the question was, well, should he be spending time with the Barnstormers or be on Ben Shapiro's show? Like, those are the trade-offs that you have to have. Then we would rather have him, go and talk to the Barnstormers or whatever it is. So It really is just about how to maximize his time. And on a presidential campaign, there are so many demands on his time that it's not like we could go everywhere. And so we just want to be strategic, figure out, okay, well, if there is a strategic reason for going on here, if there are persuadable voters, let's do it. If not, then no.
Wow. That's a great answer. Somebody asked about your cowgirl boots. The comic relief.
Yes. So I have a few pairs of cowboy boots. As I worked in South Dakota in 2004, and I started my love affair with cowboy boots there. They're really comfortable. They give you a little bit of a lift like heels, and they're a little bit more formal looking than sneakers, but mostly they're really, really comfortable. So there was a pair that I wore almost exclusively on the campaign trail, and I just considered them my lucky boots. And so I'd wear them on nights of debates. I would wear them on election nights, all of that, because I did sort of have I use them as an emotional crutch, and I did believe that they were my good luck charm. But for anyone who has never owned cowboy boots, I really, really recommend them, because once you break them in, it just feels like you're walking on air, and they feel like the most comfortable sneakers that you've ever worn.
Wow. Good to know. But I like hearing they were your lucky boots.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. But I wore them at the Iowa State Fair. I wore them on the bus tours. I wore them at the debates. So they were my lucky boots for sure.
Oh my gosh! So we're starting to run out of time here. So I've got to get to. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to skip some of my.
Okay, I'll be quick. Yeah.
No, you're. We just have so many questions, but people are really wondering, what can we do to help in the midterms, and specifically, what can we do to help Mallory Morrow, and three effective actions a volunteer can take. So midterm.
Right. So most important is, one, get involved in your local communities. If there are big or important races there, and by big, I don't mean it needs to be U.S. Senate race or a gubernatorial race or whatever it is. If it's a competitive race for state house, state ledge, county clerk, whatever it is, get involved, because we need to elect Democrats at every level. And one thing we saw recently is Republicans for 50 years were relentless at building up the Republican Party at all levels. And that is part of how they were able to get the Dobbs decision from the Supreme Court. And we need to have a similar 50-year strategy. And this is something that Pete talked about a lot on the campaign, which is we need to stop treating the presidency like it's the only office that matters. So one, I would say get involved in any of your sort of local campaigns. If they are, if they're competitive between Democrats and Republicans. If you want to get involved in campaigns outside your local community, look to ones where your support can matter most, and where Democrats actually one, need your help, and two, can benefit from your help. One thing we saw, for instance, in 2020 was, I think, that $54 million went to Amy McGrath's campaign in Kentucky. A lot of it from small donors, whereas in total, only $50 million was spent on every state legislative race across the country. So that's not a great allocation of resources. So there are going to be a lot of Democrats who are going to be soliciting small dollar donations from you and using, sort of emotional appeals, but they're not going to be in races that Democrats can win. So make sure that if you are going to volunteer or give small dollar donations to people, it's to people who can actually win, and in races where we really need the support. So for instance, on the gubernatorial or Senate level, just because those are easier to rattle off than House races, races in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, Georgia, those are going to be really key races. Ohio is also a potential for Democrats to win. And don't be sort of lured in by the viral videos online that we see. But most importantly is, get involved in the local level, and really, if you can, try to help build up Democrats from the bottom up, because we did lose a lot of local seats in 2009 and 2010, and we got to build that bench back up. As for Mallory, she's her goal of this cycle is to flip the Michigan State Senate, which is going to be really important. And so if any supporters here live in Michigan, I would say, reach out there, go to our website, see if you can help volunteer, help go door to door for some of the targeted candidates. And for people outside Michigan, I'm sure that they would appreciate $5 from you for their campaign efforts, because she's already raised $1 million to flip the state Senate, which is amazing. But it's going to take a lot of money, and it's going to be the first time in almost 30 years that if they're able to do it, that the Michigan would see a Democratic state Senate.
That's exciting. Okay, well, I'll be following that. Oh my gosh. Well, we're all really concerned about the midterm. So a lot of people want to put their concern into and that energy into actual action. So, yeah. Thank you so much. That was really important information that you just gave us. So I know that we've got to end this. You're really busy, got other interviews. So I'm going to end with, what are your next steps? So now that you've got a New York Times bestseller under your belt, well, what's on your bucket list going forward? You can just relax now. You've done everything.
I know. Well, so I'm going to finish. I've got a few more weeks of going out, promoting the book. And, after, in a couple hours, I'm flying to San Francisco, and then I'm going to LA. And then next week I'm going to be in DC, and then in Colorado. And then I'm going to be pairing some book events with local Democratic events, to use the book to help, raise money for Democrats. I think I'll be doing that in places like Michigan and Ohio. But what's next is, one, helping Democrats, obviously, in the midterms. I don't know, in my bucket list, to be honest with you, I didn't ever have being a New York Times bestseller on my bucket list.
And why limit yourself on bucket lists, right?
And I didn't have being a senior advisor to Pete on my bucket list. So one thing I've learned in life is that a lot of the best things that have happened to me have sort of been surprises. Obviously, they don't come without a lot of hard work, but I'd like to travel a little bit more. But on my bucket list would be helping Democrats more, and really helping Democrats on the local level, because they've got enough help for Senate races, for gubernatorial races, for presidential races, but maybe helping to bring more attention to sort of the less glamorous races that we don't always pay attention to.
Well, you'll make them glamorous.
We'll see. But it's been really fun working with people like Mallory McMorrow to help bring more attention to the local level, because Republicans have done that so effectively, and now Democrats need to start doing that as well.
Yes. Well, a lot of people ask you the question of, will Pete run again and will you work for him again? And so I'm not going to ask that and I'm not going to make you answer, but this is how I'm going to say it. Well, Liz, I really hope that someday Pete Buttigieg runs for president again, and then I hope I see you on his list of campaign staffers, and we will see each other again on the trail. So that is my wish.
Yes, well, I certainly hope he runs again. He said he doesn't know if he will run again, but at some point I'm probably going to age out of working on presidential campaigns. It's very tough on the personal life, very tough on the body, but I certainly hope to see him running for something again.
Oh, yes. Well, thank you so much for being on my Twitter Travels for Pete podcast today. It was so much fun talking to you. I do appreciate our conversation today. And I wish you the best of luck with your book and everything else that you do in your future.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. And everybody, if you haven't already gotten Any Given Tuesday, a political love story by Lis Smith, go out and get it right now. You'll really enjoy the read. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Twitter Travels for Pete Next Steps Edition. Now everybody get to work.